Let's talk a little more about the eye. Some important things I should have pointed out earlier, but hopefully you are not sculpting along with me and lagging slightly behind where I am in these videos, so it won't be much of a problem. Let's talk about how to build the eyelids, not in terms of technique, but in terms of what to look for and how to observe the eyelids. I tend to start with the eyelids when sculpting the volumetric form of the eye. The eyeball I tend to leave until later, as it's much easier to adjust the eyelids, their height, their position, the drawing of them, without the volume of the eyeball present inside or between them. We've spoken about the high points of the eye and the inside and outside corners of the eye already. Connecting all of these together, of course, creates the eye. But we must do so with care and with respect to our model. Otherwise, we're likely to end up with something that is missing the organic quality of life and the specific nature present on our model. Let's start with the upper lid and do what we've done so many times before. The lid itself is a complex curve, and by not breaking a complex curve down into straight lines, at least in our minds, if not on our sculpture, we are likely going to miss the nature of said complex curve. The upper eyelid consists of 3 or 4 lines usually, depending on your subject. Here you can see these lines. We should carefully note which one of these lines are the longest and in what order of length the others follow. This matters because this setup of relative lengths between the individual line segments is what will make up the nature of the complex curve we find in the upper lid. We should at the same time note that the upper lid not only borders to the eye, but also the eye sockets above. The lines making up this separation differ from those meeting the eyeball a little bit. We get 2 different complex curves, in other words. A general rule of thumb is 4 line segments for where the upper lid meets the eyeball, and 3 for where it meets the eye socket. This generalization tends to play out pretty decently for us in most scenarios. Where the angle breaks take place here, 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 and here is also where we are going to have a change in direction on the form of the eyelid itself. Remember that angle breaks tend to be indicative of a form change or a planar change. We don't have one form transitioning into another right here, but a plane change is taking place, and of course it happens to take place right where the angle break in the form happens. We should also note that the highest point of the upper lid sits right here, slightly to the inside of the eyeball itself. We'll talk more about this really soon once we've covered the lower lid. The lower lid is ever so slightly simpler than the upper lid. It consists of 3 line segments, and the line segments at the bottom of the eyelid where it meets the bag underneath the eye tends to echo the line segments happening where the lower lid meets the eyeball. The key thing to note about these line segments is these relative lengths in relationship to each other. When you are sculpting the eye, you should set up the borders you are attempting to function within. You do that by establishing the heights and the depths from the side view and the widths from the front view. Once you have those, you can fill them with these line segments. When you start out, the only thing you should worry about is getting the relative lengths of each line correct. If line number 1 is the longest, followed by the second line and then the third, make sure that the relationship is true in your work as well. The accuracy of how they relate to each other doesn't need to be millimeter to millimeter accurate right now, and really it cannot be, actually. So just worry about making sure that you are getting something that is going to visually represent your model well. We can make finer adjustments to our work once we get there. Not only are we dealing with two lids separately, of course, the two lids have a relationship to each other as well, which we need to respect. There are more rules or guidelines to follow here that will make your work much easier for you. Notice where the high point of the upper lid is, where it meets the eyeball, and where the low point of the lower lid is. These 2 points will more often than not sit at a slight angle to each other, not directly across from each other. This creates a much more visually pleasing eye and helps us move away from an eye that is childish and simplistic into an eye that's real, hopefully. This brings me to the final point I'd like to make in this video. While we have eyes facing directly at us, directly forwards towards us, eyes do of course look off to the left and to the right from time to time. And when they do, how do we represent them accurately? An issue you will see often is eyeballs looking off to the left or to the right, but something seemingly being very wrong about the eye itself. And the issue that you're likely seeing at this point is the eyelids not following the eyeball, changing essentially with the direction of the eyeball, the direction of the gaze. Where the high point and low point of the lids sit depends on where the eye is looking. The relative lengths of the line segments making up the lids depends on the direction the eye is looking. So in order to effectively communicate what the eye is doing, you have to pay close attention to all of these elements and represent them truthfully.